يا رايحين على مصر مين يبعت سلامي في كلمتين يا أهل الله. مشتاق لناسها الطيبين ودي ياما فيها مخلصين يا ما شاء الله. وفي أزهر العلماء تقدر تقول ما تشاء. ده أنا والله بدعي لهم رب السماء وقولوا آمين إن شاء الله إن شاء الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is lesson number 11 in this series of lessons in which we intend to provide a guide to a serious student of the school of Imam Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. In the last lesson we spoke about the traditional curriculum of the Shafi'i school that is taught in the lands of Yemen and Sham. And today, inshallah, we would like to talk about the book of Imam al-Nawawi, Minhaj al-Talibin. Minhaj al-Talibin wa Umdat al-Muftin is one of the books by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. And as we mentioned previously, this is the last book that is taught generally in the curriculum that is taught to students of Imam Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, to students of the madhab of Imam Ash-Shafi'i. So a student generally who wishes to pursue serious studies in the fiqh of Imam Ash-Shafi'i starts with a basic matan and then goes up the ladder until he finally reaches this book, which is the book Minhaj al-Talibin. This book is also taught at the University of Al-Azhar in the College of Sharia to those students who want to specialize in the Shafi'i school. This book is taught over the course of 4 years, and in fact the entire book is not taught, but selections are taken from this book over the course of 4 years. So this is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this book, so that this part of the series can be beneficial to students, especially from the West or English-speaking students who wish to pursue their studies at Al-Azhar University at Kulliyat al-Sharia and are Shafi'is. Inshallah, we can give an introduction to those students about this book, which will facilitate their studies at Al-Azhar universities, as well as read from the introduction of this book, which will also help them as they study for their classes at Al-Azhar University. This, inshallah, introduction will also be helpful to anyone who wishes to read Minhaj al-Talibin as a book of reference in the Shafi'i school, as well as those elsewhere in the world who are serious about studying the Shafi'i school and wish to one day study the book Minhaj al-Talibin with a qualified teacher. So this book then, Minhaj al-Talibin, first of all, as I mentioned, is authored by Imam Yahya ibn Sharaf al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the 7th century Hijri. And it is a summary. Minhaj al-Talibin is a summary of another book called Al-Muharrar by Imam al-Rafi'i, that was written by Imam al-Rafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. And we mentioned this previously, but just to remind you, Minhaj al-Talibin is a summary of Al-Muharrar Al-Muharrar is written by Imam Al-Rafi'i, and Minhaj al-Talibin is written by Imam Al-Nawawi or Al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. And together these two scholars are called Ash-Shaykhan in the Shafi'i school, the two shaykhs. Any issue on which these two agree upon is generally the mu'tamad, the preponderant position in the Shafi'i school, with a very, very few exceptions. In cases where the later Shafi'i authorities came to a unanimous agreement that both of them had made a slip. But those are very rare occasions. The vast majority of issues in fiqh are treated in this way, that if Imam al-Nawawi and Imam al-Rafi'i agree on a ruling, then that is considered the preponderant position in the Shafi'i school. So, Minhaj al-Talibin is a summary of Al-Muharrar. This is Imam al-Nawawi's service, if you will, to the book Al-Muharrar. Imam al-Nawawi mentions in the introduction of his book Minhaj al-Talibin the importance of Al-Muharrar, the greatness of the book Al-Muharrar, and why he chose to write a summary of Al-Muharrar, and we will go over that insha'Allah ta'ala. Now, just to remind you, and I did mention this earlier, that this book should not be confused with another book of Imam al-Nawawi called Al-Minhaj, because Al-Minhaj is the title of the commentary on Sahih Muslim. The commentary on Sahih Muslim, also referred to as Sharh al-Nawawi ala Sahih Muslim. In fact, this book is more commonly referred to with that title, Sharh al-Nawawi ala Muslim. It is rarely referred to with this title. More frequently, this title is used to intend this book. However, I did want to point out the similarity between the two names so that you are not confused when you see that mentioned in various books. So, as I mentioned, Minhaj al-Talibin is a summary of the Muharrar, and Minhaj al-Talibin has a number of commentaries written on it. In fact, there are close to 100 commentaries that have been written on Minhaj al-Talibin, which shows the great importance of this book in the school. Because usually the more commentaries that a book has, the more significance that book has in the school. That means that the scholars gave importance to that book, and that's why they decided to write commentaries on this book. So close to 100 commentaries, most of which are not in print today. However, nevertheless, many of them are in manuscript form, and that again goes to show the importance of this book in this school of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. So out of those many commentaries that exist on Minhaj al-Talibin, 4 of them are extremely important, and that's what I would like to talk about now. The 4 most important commentaries on Minhaj al-Talibin. The first one is Kanz al-Raghibin. Kanz al-Raghibin by Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. Kanz al-Raghibin by Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. Jalaluddin al-Mahalli is often referred to as Ash-Sharih. Ash-Sharih. So if in the later books of the school, if they say Qala Ash-Sharih, then what they mean is Qala al-Mahalli. And that shows the significance of this particular commentary of Minhaj al-Talibin. It is as if this is the sharh, this is the commentary, ash-sharh, and therefore its commentator, ash-sharih, is al-Mahalli is ash-sharih, he is the commentator. So Kanz al-Raghibin is the first commentary on Minhaj al-Talibin that I wanted to mention, and it is actually this book that is the curriculum of Al-Azhar University College of Sharia for Shafi'i students. And this was recently published in a nice publication by Darul Minhaj Jeddah as well, in one volume. It is a short commentary, it's not very detailed, and it primarily deals with evidences, reasoning, legal reasoning of the fiqhi rulings that are mentioned in Kitab al-Minhaj, and it also points out differing opinions or other opinions within the school on issues in which there is disagreement. So it will point out other opinions on issues on which there is disagreement within the school itself, and it will mention the reasoning behind all the opinions, whether the strong opinions or the weak opinions. As I said, it is a very concise, short, to the point commentary. It doesn't go into a lot of detail. Then comes the next commentary, which is Min Mughni al-Muhtaj. Mughni al-Muhtaj. By Al-Khatib al-Shirbini. Al-Khatib al-Shirbini. Mughni al-Muhtaj is a larger commentary of Minhaj al-Talibin. Al-Khatib al-Shirbini, rahimahullah ta'ala, Al-Khatib al-Shirbini, rahimahullah ta'ala, who passed in the late 10th century Hijri. So put that here, 10th century, late 10th century Hijri. He was a student of Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. He was a student of Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. And he is referred to with the abbreviation Kha-Ta. Kha-Ta is the abbreviation that's used for Al-Khatib al-Shirbini by later scholars. The third commentary is Tuhfa al-Muhtaj, which is written by Sheikh Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. Sheikh Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in early 11th century, and he is referred to with the abbreviation Hajim or Hajj. So Ibn Hajar al-Haytami is the author of Tuhfatul Muhtaj, which is the third commentary on on Minhaj al-Talibin. And then finally, the fourth commentary is Nihayatul Muhtaj, which is written by Shamsuddin Muhammad al-Ramli. Shamsuddin Muhammad al-Ramli, who is referred to with the abbreviation Mim Ra. And he also died in late 10th century. So these are the four most famous commentaries on Minhaj al-Talibin: Kanz al-Raghibin, Mughni al-Muhtaj, Tuhfat al-Muhtaj, and Nihayat al-Muhtaj. Now these three, al-Shirbini, al-Haytami, and al-Ramli, were actually contemporaries. They all studied in Egypt for a long time under many of the same scholars. But then later on, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami moved to Mecca, where he wrote his book, Tuhfat al-Muhtaj. However, initially they were all colleagues, and they were students of the same teachers, as I mentioned. And I mentioned that Imam al-Mahalli was a teacher of al-Shirbini, but actually that's not correct. Imam al-Mahalli was the teacher of the teacher of al-Shirbini, al-Haytami, and al-Ramli. So these three didn't study with al-Mahalli, they studied with shuyukh that had studied with al-Mahalli. These three did share Zakaria al-Ansari as their teacher. Zakaria al-Ansari, who we talked about before when we talked about the development of the Shafi'i school. He is referred to as Shaykh al-Islam. He also died in the early 10th century Hijri. Zakaria al-Ansari, Shaykh al-Islam, is the teacher of all of these three. Just to give you an idea, comparison between the three books, Mughni al-Muhtaj mentions in the introduction that Al-Khatib al-Shirbini started writing this book in 959 Hijri. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami mentions in the introduction of Tuhfat al-Muhtaj that he is beginning to write his book in 958 Hijri. And Imam Shamsuddin al-Ramli mentions in the introduction of Nihayat al-Muhtaj that he is beginning to write this book in 963 Hijri. And it is also mentioned that Ibn Hajar al-Haytami finished writing Tuhfat al-Muhtaj in a relatively short period of time. And therefore, it is not strange to find that in Nihayat al-Muhtaj, there is oftentimes phrases that are taken straight out of Mughni al-Muhtaj and sometimes straight out of Tuhfat al-Muhtaj, because this book was written later, and therefore, especially in the first quarter of the book, Nihayat al-Muhtaj seems to be relying heavily on Mughni al-Muhtaj, whereas in the rest of the three quarters of the book, it relies more heavily on Tuhfat al-Muhtaj. Although you do find references, without mentioning the name explicitly, but you do find references to Mughni al-Muhtaj and Tuhfat al-Muhtaj throughout the book of Nihayat al-Muhtaj. However, it does seem clear that in the first quarter of Nihayat al-Muhtaj, he's relying more heavily on Mughni, and in the later 3 quarters of the book, he's relying more heavily on Tuhfat al-Muhtaj. And that explains the similarities that you find in the 3 books. Also, both the Tuhfa and the Mughni rely heavily on Al-Mahalli, as well as other commentaries that were written prior to these 2 books, and therefore you do find a lot of similarities between these 2 as well. In addition to the fact that I said before that all 3 of them were contemporaries, they had the same teachers, they all took a lot from the likes of Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari, and that's also another reason why there is so much similarity between these 3 books. And yet, despite the similarities between these 3 books, the Nihaya and the Tuhfa are given priority over the Mughni when it comes to fatwa. When it comes to issuing fatwa according to the Shafi'i school, the relied upon books are these 2 over this. Okay? So if, for example, if there is disagreement between the Mughni and the Tuhfa and Nihaya, then what is given preference in preponderance is what the Tuhfa and the Nihaya say, not what the Mughni says. So that's extremely important to remember. And then between these 2 books, if there is disagreement between Tuhfatul Muhtaj and Nihayatul Muhtaj, then the question is which one of these 2 is given priority or preference? And in that, there is disagreement amongst the later Shafi'i authorities. The Shafi'is of Egypt generally preferred Nihayatul Muhtaj. Traditionally, historically, not today, historically, in the 11th century especially, and the 12th century, or especially in the 11th and the 12th centuries, Nihayatul Muhtaj was given preference in Egypt over Tuhfatul Muhtaj, whereas Tuhfatul Muhtaj was given preference in Hijaz, in Sham, in Yemen, in Dagestan, and so on. And one of the reasons that's mentioned for that is because Imam al-Ramli, Shamsuddin al-Ramli, when he wrote the book Nihayatul Muhtaj in Egypt, he then started to teach this book in Egypt, and his lessons were attended by many scholars of Egypt. And in those lessons, oftentimes exchanges would take place between Imam al-Ramli and those shuyukh. And based on those exchanges then, sometimes Imam al-Ramli would modify what he had said in Nihayatul Muhtaj. And oftentimes he would convince his audience of what he had said in Nihayatul Muhtaj. So therefore, as a result of that, the Egyptian authorities considered Nihayatul Muhtaj to be a product of all those discussions that took place with hundreds of scholars. It is mentioned in some books that 400 scholars discussed Nihayatul Muhtaj with Imam al-Ramli before it was written in its final form. And therefore, as a result of that, the Egyptian authorities and Egyptian scholars felt much more comfortable with Nihayatul Muhtaj. Now, Tuhfatul Muhtaj, as I said, was written by Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, who was living in Mecca. And his book, therefore, did not reach the same status in the eyes of the scholars of Egypt, because they hadn't argued with him about that book. And yet, the scholars of other areas preferred Tuhfatul Muhtaj over Nihayatul Muhtaj, because it seems that generally speaking, the legal reasoning of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami is stronger or was stronger in the eyes at least of those scholars than the legal reasoning of Imam al-Ramli. So due to the strength of his arguments, the strength of the arguments of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, he was given preference by the scholars of Hijaz and Sham and Yemen and Dagestan and so on and so forth. Now, having said that, Tuhfa and Nihaya are considered to be equal counterparts. They're considered by later Shafi'i authorities until our time today, they are considered to be equal counterparts. And therefore, when a fatwa is given in the Shafi'i school, the mufti is permitted to give fatwa based on either the Nihaya or the Tuhfa. And if there's disagreement between the Nihaya and the Tuhfa, then he is given the freedom to choose whichever one he wishes to give to the questioner. So both are equal counterparts in the Shafi'i school, and the disagreements between the two are generally left without preponderance according to the later authorities in the Shafi'i school. That's of course assuming that the mufti who's giving the fatwa is not a mujtahid. If he's a mujtahid himself, then he must do his own tarjih. He must do his own tarjih between the opinions of the Tuhfa and the Nihaya, and he then must give the fatwa based on what he has deduced to be the stronger position. As for the muftis, the most of the muftis who do not qualify to perform that type of ijtihad, then they are given the freedom to give fatwa according to either one. And as a result also it follows that a muqallid, someone who does taqleed and is not a scholar, may follow any of these two books in their own practice of their fiqh. Now, another thing that I would like to mention while comparing these commentaries of Minhaj al-Talibin is anybody who has spent time studying fiqh would have noticed that whenever Shafi'i books are referenced in books of fiqh, in books of comparative fiqh especially, what is generally referenced most is Mughni al-Muhtaj. We find that most scholars reference Mughni al-Muhtaj when talking about the Shafi'i ruling, and we don't see them referencing the Tuhfa and the Nihaya as much. And why is that? Why is that? First of all, is that a mistake to reference the Mughni and ignore the Tuhfa and the Nihaya? The answer is that, as I said before, the official position of the Shafi'i school is found in the commentaries of Minhaj al-Talibin generally. But when there is disagreement between the various commentaries of Minhaj al-Talibin, then what is given priority is Nihaya and Tuhfa. And therefore, if the Mughni on an issue says one thing, but the Tuhfa says something else, then what is considered is what the Tuhfa says and not what the Mughni says. So based on that, yes, it is a mistake to reference the Mughni and ignore what the Tuhfa and the Nihaya have said, especially on issues on which there's a difference between the three books. But the reason it seems why most people reference Mughni al-Muhtaj more than these two books is simply because Mughni al-Muhtaj is easier to read. It is an easier book to read. The layout of the book is more organized. The ibarat, the expressions used by the author are much easier to understand. The evidence is very clearly laid out. The various opinions are very clearly laid out. And so because of the clarity of the book, it is more accessible, especially to someone who is not a master of the Shafi'i school. And that seems to be the reason why more people feel drawn to Mughni al-Muhtaj. In addition to the fact, of course, that it is a very well-renowned, well-respected book, a commentary of a matan that is considered to be preponderant in our school. So that seems to be the reason. In contradiction to that, contrary to that, Tuhfa and Nihaya are more difficult to understand, and the Tuhfa is more difficult than the Nihaya. And it seems the reason for that is because Ibn Hajar finished the Tuhfa in a very quick time, in a very short amount of time, and it seems that he was writing fast and he didn't have the time to go back and make his expressions easier for the student. He was probably writing with scholars in mind that would be able to understand what he was saying without much explanation. So his expressions are generally more difficult to understand, more ambiguous, and require a lot more expertise and thought. So based on that, I guess we can say that the Tuhfa and the Nihaya are better references when it comes to finding out the mu'tamad position of the Shafi'i school. Whereas Mughni al-Muhtaj is perhaps a better book to teach or to study because it's a book that is more accessible. And there are books that have been written that point out all the issues on which the three books differ with each other. In fact, the Hashiyah of Abdul Hamid al-Sharwani, which is generally printed with Tuhfatul Muhtaj, always mentions issues on which Mughni has a different opinion or the Nihaya has a different opinion compared to Ibn Hajar. But that's in the Hashiyah. There are other books that have been printed as well that point out all that contain a listing of all the issues on which the Nihaya and the Tuhfa differ, or the Nihaya and the Tuhfa and the Mughni differ. So there are books available that deal with that as well, that one could keep on the side as one studies Mughni al-Muhtaj. So that, inshaAllah, should be a sufficient introduction of the book Minhaj al-Talibin wa Umdat al-Muftin of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. We will stop here for this time, inshaAllah, and next time we will start reading the introduction of the book itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate that for us. Wa sallillahumma wa sallim wa barik ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
ووجههم عند مولى الفضل مقبول قوم إلى الله قد شدت عزائمهم وحبلهم بحبال الله موصول قوم على الملة السمحاء قد فطروا وشأنهم مع كتاب الله من قولوا أعطاهم الله ما شاءوا وأكرمهم كذاك قال الذي وفاه جبريل يا ربنا خذ بنا قلبا لساحتهم لنستريح ويحمى القال والقيل العلماء لهم جاه ومنزلة ووجههم عند مولى الفضل مقبول